I never imagined that a single moment could shatter everything I thought I knew about my life. But there I was, standing in my own kitchen, my husband's son looking at me like no one ever had before. My heart raced, and in that instant, I knew. I had already crossed a line I could never come back from. What happened next? I wasn't prepared for any of it. I wasn't always this woman, trapped in a storm of guilt and desire. Just a few months ago, my life seemed perfectly normal. I was married to Daniel, my high school sweetheart. We weren't exactly the picture-perfect couple, but we made it work. 10 years of marriage brought its share of ups and downs, yet we held on, convincing ourselves that routine was enough. Daniel was kind, dependable, but distant. His job kept him busy, and over time, we fell into patterns that felt more like roommates than lovers. I told myself it was normal. Passion fades and responsibility takes over, bills, chores, and small talk over dinner. That's just life, right? Then Ethan moved in. He was Daniel's son from a previous relationship, a reminder of the life he had before me. Ethan was in his early 20s, tall, confident, and effortlessly charming. He had Daniel's sharp jawline but carried a rebellious streak that made him stand out. At first, I didn't think much of him. He was polite, kept to himself, and spent most of his time buried in textbooks. But then things started to shift. It wasn't obvious at first, just little moments. He'd linger in the kitchen while I cooked, ask questions about my day, and make me laugh in a way I hadn't in years. It felt harmless, even refreshing. Until it wasn't. There was this one afternoon. I remember it vividly. Daniel was at work, and Ethan and I were alone. We were just talking, but something about the way he looked at me sent shivers down my spine. It was different. His eyes lingered too long, his voice softened, and I felt my pulse quicken. I brushed it off. I had to. After all, I was his stepmother. But that look stuck with me. It lingered in my thoughts, replaying in my mind like a forbidden melody I couldn't shake. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. Something had awakened, something dangerous. And once it started, there was no turning back. It started with glances, quick, fleeting, but impossible to ignore. I'd catch Ethan looking at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. His eyes lingered just a second too long, like he was trying to figure me out, and each time my stomach tightened. I told myself I was overthinking it. He was just being polite, curious even. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. One evening, I walked into the living room and found him sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, and for a moment our eyes locked. It wasn't intentional, or at least that's what I told myself, but something about that moment felt heavier than it should have. "Hey," he said casually, but there was a flicker of something in his voice, something I didn't want to name. "Hey," I replied, quickly averting my gaze. My cheeks burned, and I hated myself for it. From then on, everything seemed to shift. I started noticing the little things. The way he stood just a bit closer than necessary, the way his hand would brush against mine when we passed in the hallway, or how his compliments felt too personal to be innocent. And the worst part? I didn't stop it. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself looking forward to those moments. I started lingering in rooms where he was, pretending to clean or organize just to feel the weight of his gaze. The guilt gnawed at me, but so did the thrill. One night, it came to a boiling point. Daniel was working late again, and Ethan and I were in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, watching me as I washed the dishes. "Need any help?" he asked, his voice low and smooth. "No, I'm good," I replied, but my hands trembled under the stream of water. "Are you sure?" He stepped closer, and I felt my breath hitch. I turned around, ready to brush it off, but when I met his eyes, I froze. There was no mistaking it this time. The way he looked at me, intense, hungry, made my pulse race. I should have walked away. I should have shut it down right there. But I didn't. Instead, I let the silence hang between us, thick and charged with something I couldn't name. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his eyes burning into mine. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop thinking about how close we'd been. How close I'd come to stepping over a line I could never uncross. The next day, things didn't get better. They got worse. Ethan became bolder, and I became weaker. He'd make excuses to be near me, lingering in doorways, brushing past me in the hallway, his touch deliberate but subtle. I told myself it was harmless, but my heart betrayed me. Every touch, every glance felt like gasoline on a fire I was trying desperately to put out. And then there was the way he talked to me. "You deserve better, you know," he said one evening while we sat on the porch. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I see the way he treats you," Ethan replied. Like you're just there. But you're more than that. You deserve to be seen. His words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. Because they were true. Daniel loved me, but it wasn't the same anymore. Somewhere along the way, we had stopped trying. And Ethan saw it. Or maybe he saw through it. Either way, I was drowning in emotions I couldn't control, and I knew it was only a matter of time before something gave way. The first time it happened, it wasn't planned. It wasn't even intentional. Or at least that's what I told myself. It was a Friday night. Daniel had left for a weekend trip with his friends, and the house felt unnervingly quiet. Ethan and I were alone. I tried to keep busy, cleaning, organizing, anything to keep my mind off the weight of his presence in the next room. But it didn't work. I was in the kitchen when he walked in, his shirt slightly wrinkled, hair a little messy. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I turned around, drying my hands on a towel, but I couldn't meet his eyes. "Yeah, why wouldn't I be?" He shrugged. "I don't know. You just seem tense." I laughed nervously. "Just tired, I guess." But he didn't let it go. "Is it him?" he asked suddenly. "Who?" "Daniel." His name hit me like a slap, pulling me back to reality. But Ethan didn't stop. "I see how he is with you. Like you're an afterthought." He stepped closer, and my breath caught in my throat. "You deserve more than that." "Ethan, stop," I whispered, but my voice betrayed me. It wasn't firm. It wasn't convincing. "Why?" he pressed, his voice dropping lower. "Why should I stop when we both know you feel it too?" I couldn't answer. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely think. Then it happened. He stepped closer, so close I could feel the heat of his body. His hand brushed against mine, and instead of pulling away, I froze. It was like my entire body betrayed me in that moment. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And when he reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, I let him. "I can't stop thinking about you," he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. "Ethan, we can't," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were hollow. "Then tell me to leave," he challenged. I opened my mouth to say it, but nothing came out. Instead, I looked up, and that's when it happened. He leaned in, slowly, carefully, as if giving me a chance to stop him. But I didn't. I couldn't. And the moment his lips touched mine, the world fell away. It was soft at first, tentative, but then the dam broke. The kiss deepened, and suddenly, I wasn't thinking anymore. My hands found his shoulders, and I let myself fall into him. Into the heat, the need, the overwhelming desire that had been building for weeks. When we finally pulled apart, I couldn't breathe. "This is wrong," I whispered, but I didn't let go. "Then tell me to stop," he said again, his eyes searching mine. I didn't. Instead, I let him kiss me again. That night changed everything. Afterward, we didn't talk about it. We didn't need to. The tension that had been simmering between us had finally boiled over, and there was no turning back. The next day, I tried to act normal, but every time our eyes met, the heat was still there, undeniable and dangerous. He didn't hold back anymore. He found reasons to touch me, brushing against me as he passed by, resting his hand on the small of my back when no one was looking. And each time I melted a little more. But it wasn't just physical. He made me feel seen, wanted, like I was something more than a wife going through the motions. And the more he gave me, the more I craved it. We started finding excuses to be alone. Late-night talks in the kitchen, stolen moments in the hallway, lingering glances that said everything we were too afraid to speak out loud. I knew it was wrong. I knew it could destroy everything. But the more I tried to resist, the more I realized I didn't want to. One night, he cornered me in the hallway, his eyes dark with something I couldn't name. "You have to tell me what you want," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, tears burning my eyes. "Yes, you do," he said, stepping closer. "You're just scared." And he was right. I was terrified of what it meant, of what it could cost, and most of all, of how much I wanted it. But in that moment, I let the fear go. I reached for him, and the second his arms wrapped around me, I knew there was no going back. It happened on a Saturday night, one of those moments that sneaks up on you, changing everything before you even realize what's happening. Daniel was out of town again. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the television in the living room. Ethan and I had spent the day pretending like nothing was wrong, like we hadn't crossed an unforgivable line. But the tension between us was impossible to ignore. I was folding laundry in the bedroom when he appeared in the doorway. "Need any help?" he asked, his voice steady, but there was something in his eyes, something I recognized all too well. I shook my head. "I've got it." He didn't leave. Instead, he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. My heart started pounding. "We can't keep doing this," I whispered, but even as I said it, I didn't believe it. "Then tell me to leave," he said, echoing the words he'd spoken that night in the kitchen. I didn't. Instead, I dropped the shirt I was folding and let him step closer. His hand brushed against mine, and it was like a spark ignited. Before I knew it, his lips were on mine, desperate, hungry, and full of everything we'd been holding back. I didn't think. I didn't stop. His hands were everywhere, tracing my arms, pulling me closer. And I let him. For the first time in months, I felt alive, wanted. And then it happened. The door creaked open. I froze, my heart dropping into my stomach. Daniel was standing there. His eyes darted between us, taking in the way Ethan's hands were still on me, the way my hair was disheveled, my lips swollen. For a moment, no one said anything. The silence was deafening. Then Daniel's voice cut through it like a knife. "What the hell is this?" I stumbled back, guilt crashing over me like a tidal wave. "Daniel! Don't!" he snapped, his eyes blazing. "Don't even try to explain." Ethan stepped forward, his posture tense. "It's not what it looks like." But Daniel laughed bitterly. "Not what it looks like? Are you kidding me? I'm not blind." I reached out, desperate to calm him down, but he stepped away. "Don't touch me," he said, his voice shaking. "I can't even look at you right now." Tears welled up in my eyes. "I'm sorry," I choked out. "I didn't mean." "But you did," he interrupted, his voice cold. "You did mean it. Don't stand there and lie to me." Ethan tried to speak, but Daniel cut him off. "And you?" He turned to his son, his expression filled with betrayal. "You're supposed to be my family. How could you do this to me?" Ethan didn't back down. "Because you don't deserve her." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Daniel's face hardened. "Get out," I gasped. "Wait. Both of you," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Get out of my house." Ethan grabbed my hand, but I pulled away. "No, I need to talk to him. I need to fix this." "You can't fix this," Daniel said. "Not after this." And he was right. I had destroyed everything. I turned to Ethan, my heart breaking. "You should go." He looked at me, his expression torn. "I'm not leaving you." "You have to," I said, my voice barely a whisper. For once, he listened. I stood there, alone, as he walked out the door. Daniel didn't say another word. He just turned and left the room, leaving me to collapse onto the bed in tears. The weight of what I had done hit me all at once. The guilt. The shame. The undeniable truth that I had ruined my marriage, betrayed my husband, and lost the only sense of stability I had left. I wanted to believe there was a way back, a way to fix what I'd broken. But deep down, I knew the truth. Some things can't be undone. The silence in the house was unbearable. Daniel hadn't spoken to me since that night. He packed a bag and left without saying where he was going, or if he'd come back. The emptiness felt suffocating. Every corner of the house reminded me of what I'd done, the shattered trust, the betrayal. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real, that maybe there was still hope. But hope felt like a cruel joke now. The worst part? I didn't regret the way Ethan made me feel. I hated myself for that. I spent the next few days in a haze, replaying every moment in my head. The look on Daniel's face when he saw us. The hurt. The betrayal. I could still hear his voice echoing in my ears. "You did mean it." Because he was right. I had meant it. Every touch, every glance, every whispered word. I had wanted it all. But now I was left with nothing. Ethan tried to call me. I ignored him. He texted apologies, explanations, promises, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. It wasn't fair to him, but it wasn't fair to Daniel either. I had crossed a line, and there was no undoing it. Then one night Ethan showed up at the house. I heard the knock and froze. My heart raced as I opened the door, and there he was, looking as broken as I felt. "We need to talk," he said softly. I stepped aside, letting him in even though I knew I shouldn't. "I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted, his voice trembling. "I know it's wrong, but I can't pretend like it didn't happen." Tears filled my eyes. "Ethan, we can't." "Why not?" he interrupted. "Your marriage was already falling apart. You can't tell me you were happy." "That doesn't make this okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, and I felt my breath catch. But it felt right, didn't it? I hated him for saying it, because it was true. And that scared me more than anything. I pulled away. "You need to leave." "No," his voice broke. "Not until you tell me this didn't mean anything." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Because it had meant something. And he saw it. "That's what I thought," he said quietly before turning and walking out the door. I collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel never came home. He sent a lawyer instead. The divorce papers arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, and the finality of it broke me. I wanted to call him to beg for forgiveness, but I knew it was pointless. What hurt the most was the realization that this wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything that had been wrong long before Ethan ever stepped into my life. Daniel and I had been broken for years. I just didn't see it until it was too late. I tried to focus on rebuilding, finding a job, moving out of the house, starting over, but the guilt never left. And neither did Ethan. He tried reaching out again, letters, emails, even showing up at my new apartment once, but I shut him out. I knew if I saw him again, I'd fall right back into it. But that didn't stop me from thinking about him, wondering if he still thought about me, if he regretted it as much as I did, or if he didn't regret it at all. The truth is, I'll never know. Because no matter how much I wanted to believe we could have been something more, all we were was a mistake, a beautiful, heartbreaking mistake. And now I'm the one who has to live with it. Starting over wasn't easy. Some days it felt impossible. The guilt clung to me like a shadow, a constant reminder of the line I had crossed and the lives I had shattered. The divorce was finalized within months. Daniel didn't fight it. He didn't even look at me during the proceedings. The man I had shared a decade with was now a stranger, and I had no one to blame but myself. After the papers were signed, I sat in my empty apartment, staring at the walls and wondering how I'd let my life fall apart so quickly. But the truth is, it didn't fall apart overnight. It unraveled slowly. I spent so much time pretending to be happy that I didn't realize how lonely I'd become. And when Ethan came along, he filled a void I didn't even know existed. He made me feel wanted, alive, things I hadn't felt in years. But it wasn't love. It was desperation. I see that now. I thought what we had was special, that it meant something deeper, but it wasn't built on trust or respect. It was built on lies and secrecy, and nothing good can ever come from that. Ethan tried to reach out again a few months later. He showed up at my door looking hopeful, but I couldn't let him in. "I can't do this," I told him, my voice shaking. "But I love you," he said, and for a moment I almost believed it. But love doesn't destroy people. It doesn't leave you drowning in guilt and shame. "I'm sorry," I whispered, closing the door. And that was the last time I saw him. Letting go wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I had to face the truth. I wasn't in love with Ethan. I was in love with the idea of escaping my reality, of being someone else, even for just a moment. But fantasies can't last forever. In the end, I lost everything: my marriage, my stability, my self-respect. And for what? A fleeting sense of passion that left me emptier than I was before. I've learned a lot since then. I've learned that love isn't always about passion or excitement. Sometimes it's about showing up every day, even when it's hard. It's about choosing each other, over and over again. I've learned that mistakes don't define us, but they do change us. And I've learned that forgiveness, real forgiveness, starts with yourself. I'm not the same person I was when this all began. I'm stronger now, wiser, but I'm also more cautious. I know how easy it is to let loneliness turn into temptation, how quickly boundaries can blur when you're searching for something to fill the emptiness. I've made peace with my past, but I'll never forget it. Because the truth is, no matter how much time passes, there are some mistakes you carry with you forever. And maybe that's the point, to never forget, so you never make the same mistake again. What would you do if you found yourself caught between desire and betrayal? Could you walk away, or would you risk everything for a moment of passion? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories or opinions. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more shocking and emotional stories like this one. Stay tuned, there's always more to uncover. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments.